It started with small things, moments I never mentioned to anyone. My husband, Aaron, had been working late for weeks, buried in meetings, exhausted, and distracted even when he was home. I told myself it was normal. We'd been married for 6 years, and people change, but the silence between us was growing louder. He stopped asking how my day was, stopped noticing the little things. I missed feeling seen. The shift was subtle. We weren't fighting, there was just a vast quiet. So when his coworker, Dean, offered me a ride home from Aaron's office party that night, I didn't think much of it. Aaron had to stay behind to wrap up some presentation. "Take my car," he said. "Dean can drop you off." I shrugged and agreed. The ride started out casual. We chatted about the party, laughed about the awkward speeches. Dean was charming, but respectful, nothing suggestive, just attentive. More than I'd felt from Aaron in months. Then the conversation drifted deeper. He asked about my work, my interests, even the book I was holding in my lap. No one had asked me about those things in a long time. I remember thinking, this is the first adult conversation I've had in weeks that wasn't about groceries or bills. Before I knew it, we were sitting in the parked car outside my house, the engine still humming. The night felt warm, safe. There was no touch, no kiss, but the intimacy was thick. I felt guilty even then, and yet I didn't want to leave the car. We stayed there talking for almost 40 minutes. When I finally stepped out, I told myself it was just a moment. Nothing happened, but something I couldn't name. Over the next few weeks, Dean messaged me once or twice, just casual texts at first. Then they turned more personal. He remembered details about me that even Aaron seemed to forget. I tried to convince myself that it was innocent, but I was lying not just to Aaron, but to myself. We met for coffee once. I told myself it was just to clear the air, but that meeting was electric. We didn't touch, but I left the cafe with my heart pounding and hands shaking. I had never felt so desired, emotionally, without a single physical act. That's when I knew this wasn't about sex. It was about being wanted. Understood. I began to hide things from Aaron, my phone, my mood swings. I couldn't talk to him the way I used to. Every moment with Dean made me feel alive, and every conversation with my husband made me feel robotic, but the guilt started to take root. One night, I dreamed Aaron found out. I woke up crying and didn't know why. The real break came one weekend. Aaron borrowed my phone to check the GPS while driving to his mom's. That's when the message popped up. Just one line, "Still thinking about our talk yesterday." I saw his eyes freeze. He didn't say a word at first, just handed the phone back. Later that night, after we put our daughter to bed, he asked, calmly, but like someone holding back a storm, "Who's Dean?" I broke. The truth came out, not everything, but enough, that we'd talked, that we met once, that I didn't know what it was, but it felt like more. I didn't cheat, not physically, but emotionally. I had betrayed him. The aftermath was worse than I imagined. Aaron moved out for a few weeks. He said he didn't know if he could trust me again. I didn't know if I could trust myself either. What started as a ride, just a ride, almost wrecked our marriage. We're still in counseling. Some days are hopeful, others are hard, but I learned something painful and profound. Emotional infidelity is real. It can start with eye contact, with laughter, with being seen by someone who isn't your partner. And sometimes, that's more dangerous than anything physical ever could be. She had been married to Aaron for 6 years, and though she never imagined she'd feel alone within a relationship, the isolation crept in slowly, unnoticed at first. It began with missed dinners, postponed plans, and Aaron's distant replies that once carried warmth but now felt mechanical. His job demanded more of his attention: late nights at the office, early morning meetings, phone calls that interrupted quiet moments, and she convinced herself that this was just a phase. But the truth was, she no longer felt like a priority in her husband's life. She couldn't remember the last time he had asked how her day had been, or even looked her in the eyes with real curiosity. She still loved him, but the space between them had grown into a silent void she didn't know how to fill. The absence of emotional connection didn't scream. It whispered in the way he brushed past her in the hallway, in how their conversations turned into logistical updates rather than meaningful exchanges. She missed being seen, not just looked at, but seen her thoughts, her fears, her desires. She tried to talk to him, gently at first, but his stress always seemed to be the louder voice in the room. Every time she opened up about how distant they'd become, he'd sigh and say, "I'm just tired," or "let's talk later." But later never came, and each time he dismissed her emotional needs, it chipped away at her sense of worth until she stopped asking. It wasn't that she was looking for someone else, not consciously. She kept herself busy, going through the motions. Work, errands, dinners she ate alone while his plate grew cold. But she noticed how she lingered in front of the mirror a little longer before heading out. She noticed how the sound of a kind voice, a compliment from a stranger, made her heart flutter in a way it hadn't in months. She wasn't seeking an affair. She was starving for acknowledgement, for intimacy, for someone to remind her that she was still desirable, still human, still capable of being understood. Aaron's absence wasn't just physical. It had turned emotional long before he ever started staying late at the office. It was in the way his eyes glazed over when she tried to talk about her day, how his attention drifted to his phone or laptop even when she was sitting right next to him. She used to brush it off, excusing his behavior as the product of pressure, deadlines, ambition. But over time, his excuses became a daily routine, and her efforts to reconnect with him were returned with distracted nods or vague reassurances that he was just tired. She began to feel like a background character in her own marriage, present but unacknowledged, like a forgotten painting on the wall that no one bothers to notice anymore. She remembered a time when he would make her laugh with the smallest gestures, when he couldn't keep his hands off her even during the most mundane parts of the day. Now, silence had replaced playfulness. Routine had replaced passion. She would make his favorite meals and leave candles burning on the dinner table, hoping he might recognize the effort. But he always came home late, muttering apologies as he placed cold takeout boxes on the counter. The first time she cried alone at the table, she felt ashamed. By the fifth time, she had stopped crying and started growing numb. Loneliness became her most consistent companion. Even in shared spaces, she felt alone. She kept trying to remind herself of who they used to be, how they danced in the kitchen at midnight, how they made each other promises during road trips, how they used to wake up wrapped in each other's arms. Now, even their bed felt wide and empty, the space between them filled with unspoken words and unmet needs. She ached for emotional closeness, for someone to look at her like she wasn't invisible. But Aaron, despite his physical presence, was no longer available in any meaningful way. He had become a stranger she still called husband. Her self-esteem began to slip. She found herself questioning if she had become uninteresting, unlovable, or too demanding. In public, she kept up appearances, a smile here, polite conversation there, but inside, a quiet longing churned. She didn't need grand gestures. She needed connection. She needed to feel like someone saw her, truly saw her. When Dean offered her that ride, it wasn't the ride itself that meant something. It was the way he smiled and asked how she was doing with an attentiveness that felt unfamiliar and disarming. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't just someone's wife or someone's responsibility. She felt like a woman again, whole, visible, and quietly desperate for something more than silence. That vulnerability, that deep ache to be emotionally understood, is what made her say yes to the ride without hesitation. Not because she expected anything to happen, but because, in that moment, she needed to remember what it felt like to matter to someone. The moment she stepped into Dean's car, a strange mixture of guilt and comfort settled in her chest. It was supposed to be a simple ride home, nothing more, just two people making small talk after a work event. But the silence inside the car wasn't the kind that pressed down on her like it did at home. It was calm, unforced. The radio played softly in the background, and Dean adjusted the mirror with a casual ease that made her feel safe. She told herself this was innocent, and maybe it was, at least at first. But underneath the harmless gestures and light conversation, there was a current, subtle and undeniable, that neither of them dared to acknowledge yet. They talked about the event, the awkward speeches, the food. She laughed more freely than she had in weeks. Dean wasn't trying too hard. He was simply present. His tone, his eyes, the way he listened. It all made her feel that she was more than just someone's wife, more than someone waiting at home for attention that never came. When the topic shifted from casual chatter to more personal ground, she didn't resist. In fact, she leaned into it, craving the emotional warmth that his words carried. He asked about her work, her childhood dreams, the last book she'd read, questions Aaron hadn't asked in years. She told herself it was just conversation, nothing inappropriate. But deep down, she knew something had already shifted. The ride should have ended when they reached her driveway, but instead, they stayed parked, talking as the minutes stretched. Streetlights cast a soft glow inside the car, and she felt like they were suspended in a moment that didn't belong to the real world. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear but from recognition. Recognition that someone was actually interested in her soul, not just her routine. When Dean complimented her, saying he always thought she was insightful and had a quiet strength about her, she felt her throat tighten. Not because the words were romantic, but because they were exactly what she needed to hear, what she had forgotten she even wanted to hear. She thanked him, her voice softer than usual, a little unsure. Their eyes met, just long enough to make the air feel heavy. Still, there was no touch, no kiss, just that electricity, both terrifying and addictive. They said good night with hesitant smiles, and as she stepped out of the car, her legs felt strangely unsteady. She walked up the path to her front door, feeling like something inside her had awakened. The door opened to a dark house, and the sound of Aaron typing in the next room, oblivious to the emotional storm unraveling inside her. She sat on the edge of the bed later, heart still restless, replaying every word, every glance. That car ride, harmless on the surface, was now the moment she would look back on as the first line crossed, not physically, but emotionally, and that was the kind of betrayal she never saw coming. She told herself it would end there, that the ride was a one-time thing, that the connection she felt was just the result of being emotionally vulnerable. But days passed, and her mind kept drifting back to that conversation, to Dean's voice, to the rare sense of being heard. She found herself looking for his name on her phone, wondering if he'd text again, and when he did, a simple hope you got home okay. Her heart fluttered in a way she hadn't felt in years. She replied, cautiously, then again the next day, and before she realized what was happening, the two of them had slipped into a rhythm of messaging that felt familiar, safe, and dangerous all at once. It wasn't flirtation, not overtly. Their conversations were filled with thoughts, jokes, observations about life, moments that revealed how much they understood each other. But that emotional exchange began to feel like something sacred. She started hiding her phone when Aaron was near, silencing notifications, checking twice before she opened a message. With every secret exchange, the guilt crept in quiet at first, then louder. And yet she didn't stop, because Dean made her feel emotionally alive. Every word from him filled the emptiness that Aaron's silence had left behind. Every response she gave felt like reclaiming a part of herself she thought had been forgotten. When Dean suggested meeting again, for a walk this time, not coffee, she paused. Not because she didn't want to, but because a part of her still clung to the illusion that as long as it remained digital, it wasn't real. But she said yes. They met in a quiet park on a weekday afternoon. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, just like it had in the car, but the physical proximity, the stolen glances, the silences charged with tension, it all made her feel things she hadn't felt in so long that it almost scared her. Dean didn't make a move. He didn't have to. It was what remained unspoken that tied the knot around her heart. When they parted, her chest ached, not with longing, but with guilt so sharp it nearly made her turn around and confess everything. At home, Aaron was seated at the dining table, scrolling through emails. He didn't look up when she walked in. She greeted him softly. He muttered a distracted reply. The contrast hit her like a wave. The emotional intimacy she shared with Dean now far outweighed what she had left with her husband. She stared at Aaron that evening, watching him work, and realized with a sickening twist in her stomach that she had formed a deeper connection with someone outside her marriage than the man she once thought she'd grow old with. The turning point came a week later. Aaron picked up her phone to check the weather during a drive, and a notification from Dean popped up. She saw his face change, just for a second. He didn't say anything then. But the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the passive neglect she had grown used to. It was the beginning of suspicion. That night when he asked, "Who's Dean?" her entire body froze. She could no longer pretend. What started as an emotional escape had become a betrayal, one that couldn't stay hidden anymore.